If you want to be a film composer or a television composer, it's pointless to network with other composers because they're your competitors. The big thing that's different in games is that in games, usually it is a fellow composer that will hire you.
For those unfamiliar with Brian Schmidt, I could go on for a long time. He has a very lengthy and extensive career, but he is a game audio industry legend with over 30 years of experience as both a composer and a sound designer, exclusively for video games. He has helped transform the landscape of game audio from pinball machines to home consoles and just our current generation of mobile and virtual reality. He's worked with Sega, Nintendo, Microsoft, and I find it really interesting that he headed the audio technology group for Xbox and infamously composed the Xbox boot up jingle that we all know. He is a founding board member of GANG, which stands for the Game Audio Network Guild, and the founder and executive director of GameSoundCon, the leading professional conference for the game audio industry. And to top it all off, he is an inventor on about 20 patents in audio and game technology. So Brian, does that sum it up pretty well?
I think that does it pretty good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that we can make this work. So I actually just bought my ticket for GameSoundCon 2020, which is, I guess, part of these unprecedented times. It's going to be an online conference this year in October. And I think that'd be a great topic for us to launch into. That's how I first came in contact with your name. And I would just love to hear from you first. What is GameSoundCon and why should composers make that a priority?
Thanks very much. So GameSoundCon, this is our 12th year of doing it, I think. We started in 2009. It's, like you said, it's a conference for game audio professionals and also for people who are interested in games, but maybe who have a lot of experience in traditional like TV sound, TV music, film sound, and so on, but have interest in games. So we get together, we share tips, we do deep dives into, what interactive composition techniques did Marty O'Donnell lean on heavily for Destiny, or things like that. So we cover the business side, we cover the creative side, we cover the technology side. And for those who aren't super familiar with games, there's a lot of differences between doing sound and music for games and doing sound and music for more traditional media. And for those who are very experienced, again, we kind of do, it's like a GDC style talks where we'll go in pretty deep depth into some of the things that are going on. So it's typically it's a live event where, we're networking and we're hanging out, and obviously, a monkey wrench got thrown into things a few months ago. So we've rejiggered and are trying to reinvent ourselves online for this year.
Why did you create GameSoundCon initially, and how has it changed over the years? You mentioned it's been going for 12 years now. How has that changed?
Yeah, so when I was at Microsoft, one of the things that I was responsible for was, along with a great colleague, Scott Selfon, who's at Facebook now, part of our job was to go teach people how to use audio on Xbox. At the time, which was 2001, because of some technological changes in the industry, there were a lot of people coming from more traditional media into the games industry. And I was noticing a lot of these composers and sound designers were kind of being tripped up over the same things over and over again, working on their first games. It's like they're thinking, oh, this is how we do it in film. This is how we'll do it in games. And it's like, no, that's not quite right. So when I left Microsoft in 2008, one of the things I was thinking was, oh, I bet it would be cool if there were like a couple-day crash course that I could give people coming from traditional media into games to sort of feed them with a fire hose about game audio. And that's what the original GameSoundCon was. It was specifically for people who hadn't done a lot of work in games, kind of get them up to speed, 2-day crash course. And then as it's gone on and it's gotten bigger, I started adding some of the more sessions for more experienced game audio people. I added talks for high-end game audio research or interactive audio research, track specializing in audio for virtual augmented reality. And so it's just kind of grown from there.
So what happens, in your opinion, for composers at a physical conference that cannot happen online?
Yeah, it's tough. It's be lying to say otherwise that, one of the best things that people tell me about GameSoundCon is that they just get to see each other, usually twice a year, once at GDC, once at GameSoundCon, and that there is an in-person aspect of networking that's just really important that we're not going to be able to do quite as well this year. That said, one of the nice things is that I don't have the overhead of paying the Biltmore Hotel and hiring AV for 7 rooms and video recording for 7 rooms. And so we've been able to bring, obviously, the cost way, way down to a very, very modest $25. And so the expansion of the reach for that, I think, is going to be very helpful. So, but there's still lots of things that we can do, and I'm still sort of scratching my head for what's the best way to try to make up for the networking thing. I spoke at a conference yesterday, and the conference itself was held in virtual reality. It was a conference on audio for virtual reality, and it was held in AltSpace VR. And it was kind of interesting, so I'm looking at maybe doing something like that.
That sounds really fascinating, yeah. Let's dive into the annual survey that you put on through GameSoundCon every year. This is how I originally came into contact with GameSoundCon. I think I was just Google searching some stats on how much does a game composer make every year.
Right.
And I found these surveys, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I'm someone that really, really appreciates data. I appreciate analytics because it helps us move forward and to make plans, and to, I think for a lot of composers at the very beginning, it gives them hope. Wow, you actually can make a living doing this. Look how many other people are doing it. Surely there's a path here. There's a way to use this data. So I want to ask, why did you create the survey in the first place, and why does it matter for composers?
Okay, the reason I originally started the survey is sort of like you said. I love data. Data can help inform decisions and make things better by making informed decisions. The reason I actually started it was there was one year, I think it was 2012 maybe. So Gamma Sutra used to do an annual game industry survey, not audio specifically, but just the game industry. And there was one year that the survey came out, and it showed that I think it was audio was the highest paid field in the industry, even higher than programmers. And I really scratched my head on that one. It's like, I'm not sure this is right. So they were great. I contacted the Gamma Sutra people, and basically it boils down to they don't get a lot of audio responses for that industry survey. So while they may get hundreds of programmers responding with their salary information, they get a few audio people, and they tended to be things like the audio director of a studio. So as opposed to a rank and file sound designer or a composer, it was, the management of, Microsoft Game Studios, that kind of thing. And so the data was very, very, there's just too small a sample size, too biased. So I decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool to just do a broader survey, get more than just one number, what's the salary, and to get a bigger look at the picture, right? How many people are freelancers? How many are employees? What's the per music rates? What kind of roles are people taking? So that was sort of the genesis of the survey, was to try and disambiguate that Gamma Sutra anomaly and have something that really was focused on our industry, which works very differently than the rest of the game industry.
Right. How is that data collected and organized?
I do it every year or every other year. And it's I've got anonymous surveys that go out, so I put them out through various social media channels. I do some paid advertisement. I tend to market it every year. So now, again, it's not a random statistical sampling, but it's a fairly broad survey, and we get hundreds of composers and sound designers who end up filling this out.
So what trends have you noticed over the last, I guess it's been 8 years since you started it?
Yeah, I think 2014 was maybe the first one. One trend that seems to have been good in a positive direction is at least gender equity has been on the increase, although it seems to have leveled out. The first survey that we did, which kind of matched the Gamma Sutra survey, it was like 3% non-male respondents, and it's up around 14 now, which is still not great, but it's several times more than it was previously. One trend I have noticed is that the $1,000 a minute rate seems to just never change.
That is interesting.
That's kind of the sweet spot, and it's been not changing for anecdotally much longer than that, but the data kind of seems to be that's where it is. Pretty well split between salaried employees and freelancers. That's been a pretty steady, I don't know if a constant trend, I guess, is what that would be. But one thing I definitely have been seeing is that the kinds of things, particularly sound designers are asked to do, has been broadening over the last few years, where things like whys specifically being listed, or scripting, or familiarity with Unreal, and that's actually why this year, instead of doing the more traditional survey, I did a different kind of survey which looked at job postings and job skills, and have kind of been collating that. But the idea is get data. If you have data, you can know what to expect, and helps you hopefully predict the future a little bit.
Absolutely. What's the most shocking, it doesn't have to be a trend, but maybe what's the most shocking stat that you've noticed as a result of doing the survey?
Shocking stat.
I
I was surprised at how many people who were employees of companies also freelance. I think it was about a quarter of all the people who, have a salaried gig. I get my steady paycheck, I get my 401k, and I also do non-trivial amount of freelance work on the side. Some companies prohibit that. That's why I was kind of surprised. But companies appear to be pretty cool about that for the most part. And on the recent survey, I was kind of surprised at how many companies are starting to list things like Unreal experience or Unity experience, or we've kind of have known FMOD and WISE for a while, but to start to see, hey, we'd love to see a sound designer who comes in with some Blueprints experience. That was kind of new.
That is very interesting. In the surveys, has there ever been a category for free music? Has that ever been tracked?
Yeah, we haven't tracked specifically free, although we do have, is your rate 0? I don't recall what the numbers are for that. And it's also important to realize that, and this is a little bit of a problem with when people talk about the game industry as a whole. The game industry is a very, very wide surface area, right? It ranges from high-end AAA games that take 5 years to make and have an audio team of 20 with 2 composers and 3 orchestrators and the whole, do 300 minutes of music, to an indie game where one person does everything, and games in the middle where, it's still probably one person audio director, but maybe they hire a composer and, maybe outsource some VO work or something like that. So it's difficult to generalize. And so if you broke it into categories, which I try to do a little bit, you definitely obviously see, much lower rates, including 0, for things like indie games, but pretty much none of the professionally produced games have a rate of 0. They're, even a mid-core game, which let's say is a team of 20 people, not audio people, just the whole game team is 20 people with a 9-month project. That still is, they'll still be paying the composers and sound designers. You won't have, free being the rate there until you really get down to the indies.
That's very fascinating. Well, I want to zoom out and let's talk about the current state of the game music business, because I feel like we have all this data, but let's try to use that to figure out where to go from here. So I'd love to know, in your experience, what is the number one way to get more game projects?
The number one way to get more projects as a composer, it again kind of depends what you're looking for. One thing that I think people need to keep in mind is that there is a huge amount of work out there that has nothing to do with big Xbox games and PlayStation games that that you hear about all the time. There's slot machines, there's arcade machines, there's online social games, there's toys, there's physical devices. So I think if you expand your palette of what you think when you think of video game music, that certainly is number one. Right, the things you'll do as a composer to try to break into a AAA game is probably different than what you would try to do to, get sort of this, I call it the middle class composer that again is never going to do a Halo, but does over the course of their career 50 smaller games that are professionally produced and are totally valid and awesome, and they're fun, but they're not going to get you on video games live. So expand your notion of what video game scoring is, and for that crowd you have to be pretty adaptable, right? For the AAA space, if they want epic, electro hybrid orchestra, they'll go to somebody who does that and only that. But in the smaller game space, you might need to do, epic orchestral sometimes, or barbershop quartet another time, and be able to kind of go with the flow on those. The other thing that you can sometimes do is to become a little bit more of a one-stop shop and not be so dependent on the game team for some things that other composers might be dependent upon, right? If you know how to deal with VPN, if you have a decent gaming PC, a Windows PC, so you can play their game while it's under development, those are important things. And to the extent that you can talk turkey with the development team, and I'm not saying you have to code, but at least speak a little bit of programmerese so you can converse with them in their language about what they want done, about what you want done, because they're going to have to implement it. That can be really helpful.
Yeah. What do you recommend as a starting rate per minute of music for game composers? Because in the 2019 survey, the average rate has remained, as you've said, that sweet spot of 1,000, but it's usually 500 to 1,500 per minute of music. But I actually get this question all the time from young composers saying that I have such a hard time even getting to the 500, which is the number that I recommend composers start at. But what have you seen to be a good starting spot, assuming it's an indie game as a starting composer?
Yeah, indie games are tough because, again, even within indie games, there's an indie game that did a Kickstarter and raised $250,000, and there's the indie game, which should be more, called like a hobbyist game, which is somebody's doing it for fun in their spare time, or it's a game jam kind of thing. I think people can lose gigs by underbidding, right? If you bid yourself too low, you're devaluing. And I don't mean devaluing in the, you're hurting the industry sense. I have no problem with people working for no cash income, but you're subconsciously devaluing yourself as a composer, right? If you, there's an article I wrote on the GameSoundCon blog that talks about anchor prices, where if you're dealing with an indie game, You still want to have your rate be, let's say, $1,000 a minute, and that's the number you first present. But hey, I realize you're an indie game. I'd love to work with you. This project is exciting. I think it's really cool. I love the art sketches I saw, or something like that. I'd be happy. I'll do this for $2, even though I typically get 1,000. Do it for a couple hundred. And what that does is it keeps you in their mind as your $1,000 a minute composer, who they happen to be getting because they're so excited about my awesome project, as opposed to, oh, I've got one of those free composers. I get emails from them every day, or $100 a minute. Boy, that's that's a different tier of composer. So yeah, definitely be careful about underbidding. And again, someone once told me that a savvy media composer knows when it's smart to take a job for free and when it's dumb to take a job for free. Right. There are some projects that, yeah, it's worth doing, even though you're not getting much in the way of monetary compensation. Unfortunately, there are probably a lot more projects that when you do them for free, it adds no value to you. So kind of being able to sniff that out can be pretty valuable.
One of the things that I teach composers to do at the beginning phases is to give away their best music for free. Not necessarily giving it away, but exchanging that for relationship, exchanging that for a foot in the door, or I like to call it relational equity. And you're building that relationship, but it's always in exchange for something. Do you feel like that is valid advice? Is that something that helps build the start of a relationship that can lead to the next gig, versus if you're at the beginning and you don't have a ton of credits, it's really hard to command $1,000 per minute. You have nothing to back it up. Or is it just perception? What is your thought on that?
A lot of it is perception, right? You're trying to build your brand and say what, your brand, your personal brand is, what do people think of me when they hear me or hear of me? And again, you have to be very careful. I totally agree. You can do a job for no financial compensation, but that doesn't mean it's for nothing, right? Again, if you've never done anything, you have no idea what's going on in games or how it works. There's a big educational part of doing your first couple of game gigs with a couple different teams that are small budget, and maybe you're not getting paid in cash for the music. That said, there are other things you can do as well. Maybe chances are that person is a designer. Maybe you can barter, hey, I need a new logo. You need some music. This sounds like a really good match for us.
That's actually something I did in the early days. I did that with a game developer who was also an artist, and we exchanged.
Yeah.
And I thought it was the coolest thing at the time.
That's perfect. It's a great exchange of consideration, right? That's so just because you're not getting cash doesn't mean that there's no value to what you're doing. And at the high-end movies, this is a big deal. There are people who have spent $20,000 on an orchestra to do a demo, and they don't get the gig, and not only did they not get paid for it, but it cost them $20,000 to do it. So at the very high end, things like that does happen. So this notion of investing in your career is a valid one, but you do have to worry about getting stuck there and trying to keep your value high, even if the monetary cost of the developer is low. And to be frank too, from the developer's perspective, if they're literally giving you no money and no logo and nothing except, experience, that makes the developer a little uncomfortable sometimes as well, because they know that they have no leverage over you at all. Right? I feel better when I'm paying somebody, because then I can say, hey, this wasn't what I was looking for, or hey, I need this by Thursday. And if the person is doing it for free, I can't feel confident that I'm going to get delivered. Because what if a paying gig occurs, and what am I going to do? Pay them even less than the nothing that I'm paying them.
Yeah, you're fired.
So there is even a benefit to the game developer if there's at least some, some exchange of payment going on.
That's great advice. Do you believe that it's possible for a game composer in 2020 to build a successful career exclusively online? I bring that up because I have a lot of international composers who don't have access to LA, to New York, to Atlanta, any of these bigger cities where networking is just naturally easier because there's big studios. And that's one of the top questions is how do I do this online without going to these conferences? And as someone who created a conference, I thought you might have some insight on either, suck it up and come anyway, or can you really figure this out online in today's technology?
Yeah, that's a super great question. Wow. You can do it online. Again, when I was living in Chicago, most of my clients, and this is even, back in the 90s, most of my clients were not in Chicago. I had one in Florida, I had one in San Francisco, I had one in Tokyo, one in Calgary. So you can operate online. You do have to be very proactive about it. And you can network in online capacities. And I think one of the valuable ways to do that, there are obviously Facebook communities. There are, there's gazillions. There's Discord channels. There's, various Twitter things. And so what you can do, and the people I've seen kind of enter the community in terms of using, and by that I mean using the community to get work, is people who have joined these online communities or in-person communities and gone in simply to contribute and help other people. So when they see a question come up, they'll maybe even do some research and answer it. They'll, so they're not going to the community, entering these communities, these online communities, saying, "Hey, here I am. I'm a composer. Help me," or, go to a game developers forum and say, "I'm a composer. Come hire me." But rather they kind of lurk for a while and simply become one of those people that people start to recognize as being helpful. And now that's starting to establish an online relationship.
I want to speak on that because your name is actually one that has influenced me in kind of a third-party way. Before the times of Facebook and social media where you could get more immediate answers from the community, there were a bunch of forums out there that you had to search on Google and even before that, Yahoo and Ask Jeeves and whatever. And I just remember your name coming up a lot of times as someone who just very graciously answered these deep audio technical questions. And I just remember your name after all these years. Man, he's so helpful and never met you. And of course, as I continue to see your name in other capacities, I start to connect those dots. And I think what it does is it builds authority even without that physical meeting. And it builds that impression. And I think that's what a cool thing. So I definitely can see the validity of that.
Oh, wow. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's I think you can always help your career by helping other people, right? Your career in music is a long play game. It's not a, what am I going to do that benefits, I'm not going to do anything that doesn't benefit me within a 2-month window. There's seeds you plant that, will sprout many years down the road. There was one particular example is I was, randomly answering some Facebook questions about 3D audio that somebody had asked, and so I answered them, and then they answered, I had a question back, and so I pointed them at a GDC talk I had done, a few years ago. The next thing I knew, I was on an airplane being flown to Florida to get essentially what became a very nice consulting gig on 3D audio, only because I had started to engage this person in a helpful conversation to help them understand better how 3D audio worked. So it definitely can come around, and something that I think, and this is definitely so different from film and television, from what I'm told. Again, I've not done films or TV, but a lot of people tell me that, you know, if you want to be a film composer or a television composer, it's pointless to network with other composers because they're your competitors, right? You want to network with directors or studio people or production studios, and I get that. And I think the big thing that's different in games is that in games, usually it is a fellow composer that will hire you. Your current competitive freelancer 2 years from now is audio director at Riot. And now they're the one hiring composers, and they're the one hiring sound designers. And a lot of that goes on. Or a member of a game team, and you get asked, hey, we're looking for some sound designers. Can you put word out to your network? And if you have a relationship with some sound designers that you've built either online or in person or a combination of both, now you have people you know you can go to, and be confident, and be confident that you know it's going to work out. Right? Hiring people is very, very hard. It's very risky. It's tough to undo if you end up hiring the wrong person. So people tend to want to hire people that they feel they know fairly well, or they feel confident that they have enough direct information that they'll do the job well. So yeah, the fact that in games composers hire other composers and sound designers hire other sound designers is kind of a bizarre concept for people coming from TV.
I love that delineation there, because that is completely true. I hire assistants on a contract basis per game.
Mm-hmm.
And even right now, I have a team of about 4 people right now doing orchestration work and copyist work that I hired them within like about a day each, because they were already on my mind. They were friends in the community,
Right.
that were game composers that I knew would do the job great. We have quick deadlines. I needed to hire them. So I can definitely attest to that is the next rational step for me when I need help, to bring on my friends that I know will get the job done. So what a great advice.
Yeah, you do have to be careful about perpetuating sort of the in-network thing, and making sure that you're not exclusive of people who don't happen to look a lot like us. But at the same time, you are trying to build relationships, and when you have go-to people, right? Literally, last night I contacted a friend of mine. I played in a band with him years and years ago. I needed a quick drum track done for, I need it done by next week. And so I knew I could count on him because I've used him and he's great. And I know if I send him tracks, he'll send me what I want. So it's as opposed to, let me start a fresh search for a bunch of new drummers and who's going to be the exact perfect one.
Would you say that 99% of the time when you need to hire someone, it's too late to like start a relationship? It's almost like the deadlines are always so quick that you already have the person in mind when it's time to hire. It's not like you're going on a search, like you said.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And again, I don't contract out musicians a ton, or I might have a much broader, palette right at my fingertips. And I know some composers who do. But yeah, it's that by the time you need something, you want somebody that is going to do it, because it's your reputation that's on the line if they screw up. So that's why I was talking about the risk of hiring the wrong person is really high. If I contract out a sound designer and what they give me is not very good, I'm not going to give to the client. And there's some things that I don't personally have to check everything. I was working on Mutant Football League, and I needed some thousands of lines of dialogue edited, and I ended up actually literally hiring a former student, because I knew that they were meticulous about they didn't have a lot of experience in games, obviously, but I knew that they were meticulous and they knew how to keep a spreadsheet up to date. And so I was confident enough that I was like, yeah, okay, let me hire this person so that I don't have to worry about that task. So yeah, making relationships, knocking it out of the park the first time you meet somebody. In this particular case, again, I've had students that have impressed me with their work ethic, and I've either recommended them or gone on to hire them myself. And so it can be an interesting thing to do. Is you're always, as a freelancer, you're always in brand mode, right? You want to let people know that you're competent and trustworthy and you can get the job done. And sometimes that means, having to scale back on other things. And I'm actually a big political junkie, but I don't mix Facebook with politics. For me, Facebook is a professional tool. So if you're going to use social media as a professional tool, you have to consider everything you do on social media as being reflective of your brand. And is it going to inspire confidence that people who want to hire you, that you're going to get it done and you're going to hit it out of the park?
Do you think that it's beneficial for game composers to focus exclusively on game music without drifting their focus into film, TV, podcast, and the other 5,000 opportunities that are available? Have you found there's any correlation between people who focus 100% on games, get more games, or go further in their career versus those who try to do everything just because they can?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I'm the most qualified for that, since all I've ever done is games. I can, certainly I know a lot of very successful game people who compose for games who have big portfolios in other media as well. People like Austin Wintory come to mind, right? He loves games. He gets games. And I think the reason, I might even turn it around the other way, that if you want to be a successful game composer, it's totally fine if you do, like film and you do TV and things like that, but you have to get games, right? Austin, when he sees a game, I think of the score for Erica that he just did. He totally lives and breathes and has embraced the notion of nonlinear composition and creating flow in a nonlinear experience, even though music is a linear medium. And he gets that, and he thinks programmer-esque, even though he's not a programmer. He gets somebody else to do wise implementation and all that stuff. But he thinks about game music the way a game composer needs to think about game music. So if you can do that, and you also like to score linear media, that's great. But I would say if you're a linear person, you want to do games, you really have to get into that mindset. And it's always good, as a composer, it's always good to have diverse levels of income. I watched your, 10 ways of making money in music. Was it 10 ways to make $1,000 a month or something like that? And certainly having a diversity of types of income streams is valuable. That said, there's always opportunity costs, right? As time you're spending schmoozing with directors is time you're not spending, learning some other part about game audio, or, dipping your toe in Wise to see what it's like. Again, at a smaller studio, you might be expected to do all that yourself, where at a bigger studio, you'd have somebody else to do it for you. So if you're now a game composer, you can bring those Wise skills to the table, or FMOD, or whatever it happens to be. It's showing them that, you're pretty serious about your games. You're not, somebody who really wants to be a film composer, but heard there's a lot of money in games, and so you're trying to do games now.
Do you recommend that composers become sound designers to get more game work, or vice versa?
It totally depends on you. If you are a composer and your heart is set on music, and you've got the skills, right? If you could, imagine you go to LA and you're in a ballroom with the 1,000 best composers in Los Angeles. And you can confidently look around and say, I'm in the top 25 of this group, this room. no, you shouldn't learn sound design. Focus on composing in your craft and get out there and be an awesome composer. If you're not, and I'm not, I think I'm an above average composer. I'm a good composer. I'm not at the level that some of my colleagues are. But I get a lot of steady work because I can do above average composition. I can do above average sound design. I know the technology really well. And I can just flip right into any game and immediately become part of that game team. And part of that is, yes, I do sound design. Yes, I do some of the more technical stuff. And yes, I know how to speak programmer-esque to the programmers. Even if I'm not writing any code for the game, I can give an example. I wrote the interactive crowd sound for Mutant League Football, Mutant Football League, which it's not one sound effect. It's a collection of about 90 different sound effects that have RTPCs on them. But I wrote a document that looks a lot like computer code almost. It's English, but it's written in a way that the programmer will understand exactly when they're supposed to make these different sound calls for these different things. So that's something that a competitor can't do as well, I think. If you're truly in the top echelon and that's truly where your heart is, then just focus on music. If you want to broaden your skill set, get some more kinds of work. A lot of the slot machines I do, I'm doing sound design, but the sound design is stuff I could write out on music paper, right? I think of, musical flourishes when you get, achieve certain things. I could, that's music, even though it's technically sound design.
I'm thinking of the original Super Mario Brothers by Koji Kondo. He literally wrote sheet music for like the pipe sound and for the coins.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
could play them all on a piano, which is really funny.
Yep. So yeah, when you say sound design, again, if you're thinking the AAA game, sound design is a lot of interactive Foley work, right? How do I do Foley-ish type sounds? How do I make them interactive? But again, that's at the AAA space where they've got dedicated sound designers for that and a dedicated composer doing the music. However, jump down to a mid-tier game, and these mid-tier games, they can pay, pretty decently, mid 5 figures for the sound and music package for a game that takes, a month or so to do. And at that stage, sound design is not just Foley work. It's not recording so much as it is just having a good ear, creating. Again, I do a lot of work on, I've got a Yamaha motif that I use for a lot of these slot machine kind of fanfare effects. And it's really just expanding your notion of what music is. And yes, you've got occasional Foley things and you've got explosion sounds and grunt sounds and things like that. But most composers I know who start doing that, it's like, it's kind of fun. But you have to want to do it. One thing that I have definitely, in talking to audio directors, if the job description is for a sound designer and your heart's not in it, you're really a composer, just don't apply, because that's just wasting people's time. But it can be a fun gig being the sole audio director at a small game company where you're doing music and sound design. Maybe you're hiring some people to do extra sound effects, or hiring some people for extra music, or offloading the VO, and you're sort of the single point person in a 20-person company. That's a fun gig.
Well, Brian, I hate to wrap up our conversation. I'm really enjoying this, and I hope that this is not a goodbye, but a to be continued. But perhaps to wrap up our chat here today, for the sake of time, I'd love to hear, what advice can you share specifically for game composers who want to support their family earning $63,000 plus per year, which according to the GameSoundCon survey, that is the average, I believe either the median or the average per year of income. So what is the quickest way to get there and be sustainable? Kind of two contradictory statements, I know, but what's the quickest way to have that? That's what my audience is asking the most.
Right. Definitely expanding skill sets. I think is a big one for that, right? I hate to say deciding not to swing for the fence, but think of your career as a bunch of singles and with an occasional double. Like Ichiro was the one of the best baseball players the Seattle Mariners had. He was from Japan. He tremendous batting average because but like virtually no home. He just consistently hit singles. And your career, if you can think of your career as a bunch of really fun, smaller gigs, once you get then the industry is very fluid, and there's a lot of networking of people in other areas besides audio. And so when you get that one game with that you just do a bang up job on, and that team breaks up, or this programmer goes to this company and this one goes to that company and this artist goes here, they'll remember you as, oh yeah, I worked with this person. We should give them a call. So yeah, it's hard to say the quickest way because, again, like I said, your career is kind of a long play game, and you're going to plant some seeds that take a few years to sprout. But I would say, learn about games, listen to them. And play. You don't have to be a 30-hour-a-week gamer, but play them, get to know what the things are. Watch shows like yours, listen to some people who have been doing this a while. Stay curious so you're always learning new things. Contribute to an online community in a positive way to get your name out there. Don't be shy. And this obviously there's lots of other things that are, bread and butter. Have a good demo reel. Have a good looking website. Things like that. But yeah, just get out there. Don't be afraid to push yourself out of your comfort zone and just keep learning.
Well, you forgot one. They're supposed to attend GameSoundCon 2020, of course.
Register for GameSoundCon 2020. It's online, October 5th through 7th. It's only $25. This is a conference that's normally a few $100s to attend in person. This year, we are kind of in the spirit of the times. We are donating 80% of all our registration fees to an organization called Education Through Music of Los Angeles, which helps support in-school music programs in middle school and high schools that are low-income, primarily minority school districts. So we're very happy to work with that organization to support them this year. So come to GameSoundCon, register for it. You'll become an official GameSoundCon alum and be eligible for the alumni rate next year when we hope all to be back in person as the world gets a little bit back to normal.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for your time. I know we're all excited to come support that and be a part of GameSoundCon 2020. So thank you very much. I know we got to wrap it up, but look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It was a pleasure talking to you.